And I've told you recently about Judge Lambert's rulings that first authorized that we can take discovery into the Clinton email issues. And in that decision last month, he said, come up with a plan and I'll approve the plan, or a plan that I can approve to cover the discovery that I'm authorizing you to engage in. Excuse me. Then, of course, we come up with the plan. The Justice Department and the State Department both oppose. The Justice Department represents the State Department in our Freedom of Information Act litigation, and they oppose our discovery plan. Now, going back to where this lawsuit began, it's about the Benghazi talking points and any Clinton emails on it. And needless to say, we were given the runaround by the Justice Department and State Department about the existence of the Clinton emails. In fact, it was this lawsuit that forced the disclosure of the Clinton email system to the courts and to the American people. So the court's very interested to know whether it was hoodwinked, or whether the Clinton email system was designed to thwart the Freedom of Information Act, and whether or not all the documents that could have been found were found in response to Judicial Watch's lawful document request about the Benghazi talking points. Now, the talking points that I'm referencing are the talking points used by then Obama UN Ambassador Susan Rice to go on 5 Sunday morning talk shows shortly after the Benghazi terrorist attack in September of 2012. And those talking points were lies. They were falsely telling the American people that a spontaneous demonstration caused in response to an internet video led to the killings of those 4 Americans in Benghazi that day, when in fact it was an organized terrorist attack organized by Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda allies in Benghazi. They didn't want that to come out before the election, so they lied to us about the murder of 4 Americans in a terrorist attack. That's President Obama, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, etc. So we were very interested in that. We exposed a lot of the details about that. Much of what we know about the Benghazi scandal is because of Judicial Watch's work, and that led in part to the disclosure of the Clinton emails. So the judge granted us discovery, and this week he authorized the discovery plan, and in doing so, he cast aside most of the Justice Department and State Department's objections. If you want to know why President Trump might be frustrated from time to time, because he's sitting there in the White House. He's no fan of Hillary Clinton. He wants the truth in Benghazi. He wants accountability. And his Justice Department and State Department are opposing our efforts in that regard. And I guarantee you he's being told by his lawyers, don't intervene. You can't call the Justice Department, tell them to give Judicial Watch the documents, or just disclose the documents on your own. So it's up to the Judicial Watch to do this work. And so the judge's ruling, which was issued, it's a 16-page ruling, here it is. It was issued on January 15th, so that was Tuesday this week, I think. When this case began, Judicial Watch sought to verify the State Department's search for records from former Secretary Hillary Clinton and her aides concerning the talking points former UN Ambassador Susan Rice used to respond to the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi, Libya. But the case has since expanded to question the motives behind Clinton's private email use while secretary and behind the government's conduct in this litigation. Last month, this court ordered the parties to meet and confer to plan discovery. As I pointed out, that didn't work out all that well. Judicial Watch submitted a proposal plan. The government responded and countered with its proposal, which was much more narrow, allowed us access to 2 witnesses, and didn't want to answer any other questions on Benghazi. And Judicial Watch replied, and this memorandum and order maps the path forward. Discovery shall be limited to 3 issues: whether Clinton intentionally attempted to evade FOIA by using a private email while Secretary of State, whether states' efforts to settle this case in late 2014 and early 2015 amounted to bad faith, and whether state adequately searched for records responsive to Judicial Watch's FOIA request. The parties shall complete discovery within 120 days, so that would be May 15th, unless they seek additional time. The court will hold a post-discovery hearing to ascertain the adequacy of state searches to determine if Judicial Watch needs to depose additional witnesses, including Hillary Clinton and her former Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills, and to schedule dispositive motions. So, what did the judge authorize us to do? He authorized us to seek the testimony and gain the testimony of at least 7 top State Department and Clinton aides. And he also ordered us, or allowed us, to send interrogatory questions. These are written questions that have to be responded to in writing under oath to Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes. And now, who is Susan Rice? You already know, the former UN ambassador. Ben Rhodes is the national security official in the Obama White House who helped create the talking points. And of course, as I pointed out, the Justice Department and State didn't want any of that to happen. We initially wanted to question them in person. The court said, no, you can send them written questions. And this is the court's response to this State Department's and this Justice Department's efforts to stonewall us and cover up on Benghazi. Yet Rice's talking points and State's understanding of the attack play an unavoidably central role in this case. Information about the points' development and content, as well as their discussion and dissemination before and after Rice's appearances on the Sunday morning talk shows, could reveal unsearched relevant records. State's role in the points' content and development could shed light on Clinton's motives for shielding her emails from FOIA requesters, Judicial Watch, or on State's reluctance to search her emails. So this is a major development that we're going to be able to ask questions, and we're not going to be able to conduct a fishing expedition. We got to keep the questions focused but thorough, and we've got a court order to follow. But these are questions that no one else was willing to ask or pursue, and that Judicial Watch is pursuing over the objections of the deep state. So it's a great development on behalf of the rule of law, accountability, and transparency in government, this court ruling. And in addition to these written questions, witnesses will also have to be questioned in person under oath by Judicial Watch. And these witnesses include Eric Boswell. Eric Boswell was a former Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security who warned Hillary Clinton about her BlackBerry use. And their BlackBerry was the way that she communicated or accessed her secret email system. And Mrs. Clinton talked to him about it. So we want to question him about that. Government didn't want us to do that. We get to depose him according to the court. Justin Cooper, the Clinton Foundation employee who created the ClintonEmail.com server. So in its proposal, this is the court's wording, Judicial Watch noted Cooper's prior congressional testimony appears to contradict portions of the testimony provided to Judicial Watch by Huma Abedin in the case before Judge Sullivan, who's another judge who allowed Judicial Watch some discovery in this case in 2016. Cooper repeatedly told Congress that Abedin helped set up the Clintons' private server. Abedin testified under oath she did not know about the server until later. So who's telling the truth? We get to ask Cooper questions about that. Clarence Fenney, who is the former Deputy Director of State's Executive Secretariat staff. An Executive Secretariat is the part of the State Department that provides support for the Secretary of State, essentially the Secretary of State's executive staff. This case questions hinge on what specific state employees knew and when they knew it. As the principal advisor and records management expert responsible for controlling Clinton's official correspondence and records, Finney's knowledge is particularly relevant. This other witness is really big. Heather Samuelson, the former State Department senior advisor who helped facilitate State's receipt of Clinton's emails. This case turns on what specific government employees knew and when they knew it. So we should be able to depose Samuelson according to the court. And of course, Heather Samuelson was also Hillary Clinton's private lawyer who was involved in the destruction of those 33,000 emails. So we'll be, I think, asking, the lawyers ask the question in the end, I just watch. We'll be asking questions, you can be sure about that. So this is a major victory for accountability. So this discovery will take place, as I say, over the next 4 months. And so these are the witnesses initially the court allowed us to question. And as the court notes, he may consider additional witnesses, such as Hillary Clinton later. We'll have to make the case to him if we do want to speak to her, which I suspect we might want to. And now the government came back almost immediately after the court's ruling and said, there's a government shutdown, we can't do discovery. And the State Department at the time was largely shut down, so there's not much we could have said to say to the court, hey, you got to force the State Department to come to work to do this discovery. But it so happened that President Trump ordered much of the State Department back to work this week. So some of this discovery will take place, and it's already taken place because we sent out material pursuant to the court's orders earlier this week. Because in addition to the sort of in-person discovery where we're taking depositions, we get to serve document requests about who knew what and when about the Clinton email issue. Take depositions potentially about the Clinton email issue from State Department, other State Department representatives, and obviously there are other interrogatories that we'll be able to serve on the State Department about the Clinton email and related Benghazi issue.
Good morning. Joining us now, Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, with us right here in studio. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you guys again.
Let's go back to last week when the news came out that Bruce Orr had told Congress, members of Congress, that he told the higher-ups in the FBI and the DOJ the realities of the dossier, who funded it, where it came from, and that there were some doubts about the dossier.
That's exactly right. Well, Mary, there were two stories last week. One was this fake BuzzFeed news story that got a big play, but this Bruce Orr story was the more important one, which of course the media happily ignored. And Orr had not only warned top levels of the DOJ, but top levels of the FBI that, look, I got this dossier. It comes from a guy who wants to see Trump, desperate to see Trump not elected, and they're connected to the Clinton campaign. And by the way, you can't really trust it. So who else did he tell there? Andrew Weissman, who's now number 2 in the Mueller operation, the attack dog as he's known. Judicial Watch found he was sending emails supporting Sally Yates as she resisted Donald Trump, the Obama holdover in the beginning of the administration that she had to be fired over. So you have this anti-Trumper getting this information, another Mueller, soon-to-be Mueller deputy getting this information that the dossier was bunk. And yet they continued to use it. In fact, they went ahead several months later and used it to justify the FISA warrants on the Trump team, namely Carter Page.
Yeah, and that's
One,
the big
2, 3, 4 times they used it.
So it's to me
never told the court the background as discussed by Bruce Orr.
To me, there's nothing particularly terrible about the FBI being given a tip, even if it's not fully vetted. Then they can take time to vet it. That's sort of what the FBI does. They're the Bureau of Investigation. Here's the issue: presenting it to the FISA court when you know that much about it and you don't tell them any of it.
Specifically, because we did get the FISA court warrant documents, the applications, they said, well, we speculate it might be someone who doesn't want to see President Trump elected. Speculate. They were told it was the Clinton
You knew
campaign.
specifically.
They knew. They were lying to the court. And they couldn't corroborate it. To your point, Vince, they had months and months they couldn't corroborate it. James Comey famously testified it was minimally corroborated.
Right.
So two things out of what you just said. We had spoken earlier about how Bill Barr saying that he trusts Mueller, he believes in Mueller. Yet, to your point, you've got Weissman sitting on his committee. You've got one of Hillary Clinton's lawyers sitting on Mueller's team. So how can you trust him when he's making those types of choices on his investigative team?
Exactly right. And special counsels are appointed presumably to ensure confidence in the fair administration of justice. And when you have biased people like Andrew Weissman, who's the number 2, as I said, an anti-Trump activist who attended Hillary Clinton's election night party in New York City. I mean, how many top-level Justice Department officials go to the big campaign party for a presidential candidate? Andrew Weissman did. And then on top of this, you had Peter Strzok also involved in all this, who was an anti-Trumper. Lisa Page, also involved in all this, was an anti-Trumper. And, Mr. Mueller, to me, needs to be questioned about his administration, his administrative activities.
He does have his own administration.
Yeah, he's running the Justice Department in large measure here. No one questioned him in Congress about these hires that you're raising.
All right, so
point about, Mary. Why not? Why is Mueller above investigation himself.
So last week, I think people were pleased to see that Mueller finally came out and said, okay, this news story, fake. And he knocks down a BuzzFeed story. There was one problem with that, though. The fact that he actually took the positive step of saying that story is fake almost gave kind of a weird tacit approval to every other story that he's failed to come out and knock down in the last 2.5 years. Where has been Bob Mueller on all of the news stories that have been coming out that are about the granular details of his investigation? Is that suggestive of the fact that all of that was true? I mean, what should Mueller be doing when it comes to these press stories? What should be his standard operating procedure?
Well, frankly, he should be closing up shop. It's been 2 years. He either has the goods or he doesn't. And this is one of the problems with this special counsel operation that I think is unconstitutional, but it's also harassing and impairing the presidency of the United States. Because when you've got this overhanging him, how can he operate fully, and how can he do his job the way we want him to do
it's
his
a bit
job?
schizophrenic, because like he actually released that statement, it seems like, to relieve the president of the pressure that was created by a fake news story.
There
Well, if that's the
was a
case,
little mini political crisis about whether the president was going to be removed because
Yes.
he was implicated in obstruction of justice.
Exactly.
And I tell you, this tells you why we need to shut it down, because when you've got this investigation ongoing, the suggestion is the president did something wrong, and there's no evidence. And everything that we know about is that he was being victimized and illicitly targeted. And Mueller's benefiting, by the way, from this dossier. The fourth and final application was signed off by Rod Rosenstein in the middle of the Mueller appointment.
Now, this is another fun detail. One Codell, this document we came up with later in 2010, one Codell traveling from D.C. through Tel Aviv to Baghdad to discuss matters of mutual concern with government leaders, including members of Congress and their spouses. It cost $17,000 per hour in aircraft alone. Purchases for the Codell include Johnny Walker Red Scotch, Grey Goose vodka. As you might imagine, I'm not a heavy drinker, so E&J Brandy, I've never had that, Bailey's Irish Cream, Maker's Mark Whiskey, Courvoisier Cognac, Bacardi Light Rum, Jim Beam Whiskey, Beefeater Gin, Dewar's Scotch, Bombay Sapphire Gin, Jack Daniel's Whiskey, Corona Beer, and several bottles of wine. Now, I don't know about you. I travel. I hate traveling, but I do travel for Judicial Watch. The idea that I would get on a plane and start spending Judicial Watch money on alcohol like that, I'd probably cut my arm off before that would happen. Yet this is the expectation on a Codell to a war zone. Was Baghdad a war zone at the time? Yeah, probably. That was the list. And we have all the receipts, so you can go online and look at these various documents that I'm talking about. According to a memo for the record, there was a Codell that involved a stop in, in Israel. They could only bring kosher items to the hotel, which is understandable. But again, kosher alcohol for mixing beverages in the delegation room was purchased on the local economy, meaning once they got there, bourbon, whiskey, scotch, vodka, gin, triple sec tequila, etc. We had last week a big victory that I announced, and it's gotten a lot of positive feedback and interest from, I know you and other folks who follow this issue closely, which is a Judicial Watch settled a federal lawsuit on behalf of itself and our clients in California against California and the County of Los Angeles that requires Los Angeles County to begin taking steps to clean up to 1.56 million inactive voters off of their election rolls. About 1 of every 4 voters on their election rolls is inactive, meaning they haven't voted in many, many years and are unlikely to be able to vote, in the sense that they either moved away or are dead. Federal law requires that states and localities take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. California hadn't done that in 20 years. So as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation, we're going to have significantly cleaner elections in California. Nationally, it's 3.5 million names we think are on the rolls who shouldn't be there. So 1.56 million of them eventually will be removed as a result of this process that's initiated after our settlement agreement. California or Los Angeles County can immediately begin removing, obviously, dead people from the rolls. To give you more details about the case, what happens is the county needs to send out a mailing to those people to many of these names, the 1.5 million names on the rolls. And if they don't respond or otherwise indicate a desire to vote, various issues, we didn't want to take anyone off the rolls who wants to be there and intends to vote or just wants to be there. But if they don't get the cards back and it looks like the person's gone, they need to start removing them. And there's a clock that begins ticking. The first set of names can be removed as early as next month. And then what happens is, under federal law, you have to wait for an election or two, depending on when the cards are sent out or when they had been sent out, to begin removing other names. So it will be a slow process. It will be beginning in February, and then after 2020, and then 22, and then up to 24. I mean, our agreement goes through 2024. It took 20 years to get these names onto the rolls. It's going to take many years to get them off. And the law protects, because the left will tell you that we're purging names. No, we're not purging names. This is a slower than I would like personally, but the law requires it, a slow, methodical process that has never been followed before in California, but thanks to Judicial Watch, it's going to be followed. Now, I know many say, well, all these people voting fraudulently, I don't know if they were, but I can tell you, if you've got dirty rolls, it's an opportunity for fraud, because that's a category of names, inactive voters, that bad guys can use to try to vote illegally with and fraudulently with. It's common sense. That's why federal law requires that states take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. So the big victory now is in LA County. San Diego is terrible voting rolls. There are other counties in in California that have terrible voting rolls. I think there are 11 counties in California that have more people on the rolls than are eligible to vote. LA County was terrible. It was 112% of the voting age population was on the rolls. Normally, it's like 85% of the voting age population registers. So if you got 112%, you've got like 1.5 million inactive voters who shouldn't be there. Unbelievable number. And what a credit to Judicial Watch, our legal team specifically, that we're able to get this done. It's part of a massive election integrity project. And this election integrity project began in, we began it in 2011. We had the first private lawsuits to clean up federal voting rolls filed by Judicial Watch against Indiana and Ohio, two states controlled by Republicans, by the way. Indiana, the case ended after Indiana did what we needed them to do. We settled in Ohio. They sent out one of these mailings that I was talking about. The left went crazy. They challenged that. The Supreme Court said no, they can remove names. And that was a major decision last year. The Husted case, Husted. Go ahead and read about it. But that was a case that validated and vindicated Judicial Watch's approach. So California saw the writing on the wall and said, okay, Judicial Watch will do what you're asking. And I have to say, I'm glad LA County and the Secretary of State of California did this. I mean, they could have fought us. I mean, just because the law says what it says and the Supreme Court ruled as it ruled, I mean, politicians don't necessarily follow the law, and they fight it, and they get lawyers who will argue everything. And so don't worry, the settlement agreement has ways for Judicial Watch to check that what we're asking for and what the government has agreed to do, in this case LA County, is done. And California, the state Secretary of State, is going to send out notices reminding essentially other counties what needs to be done and what the law requires. And of course, this will have a national precedent as well. But it goes to show you that it's an incredible story. And I don't say this because I'm president of Judicial Watch, but isn't it remarkable, objectively speaking, that this private entity is doing the job of what the Justice Department, in theory, is supposed to be doing, and obviously the state agencies in California weren't doing. We were just one private group that came in and in one fell swoop handled this major problem in California. And it began with, again, as I point out, hard work by our legal team in other cases, like in Ohio and Indiana. And last year we had a case in Kentucky that settled. Actually, it was a consent decree. Kentucky, I think, had one of the worst states in the nation in terms of have the number of counties with more people on the rolls than were eligible to vote. Again, that was a Republican, largely controlled state. So this is not a partisan issue, folks. Republicans let the rolls get dirty too. Democrats let the rolls get dirty too. Now, what's partisan about the issue, unfortunately, is that the Democratic left hates election integrity. And so you get all these left-wing interest groups who oppose us. George Soros supports a lot of them, and they oppose our efforts. And they're very much, they've got a tremendous amount of resources involved here. Dozens of groups do this anti-election integrity work on the left. They oppose voter cleanup, voter roll cleanup, like Judicial Watch has highlighted. They keep on saying, they keep on lying about the process by calling it voter purges, like there's something nefarious afoot. They hate voter ID. They hate the idea of citizenship verification. Voter ID. Does your state require voter ID? My guess is it doesn't. And even if it does, it's probably a weak voter ID law. I'm going by memory here, but I think there are only 10 states in the United States that have a strict voter ID law. And that's because of this coordinated effort by the left to oppose election integrity, which I'm convinced is there to this opposition to voter election integrity. It's because the left wants to be able to steal elections if necessary. In fact, they weaken voter integrity. You've got, for instance, in California, which we're still investigating this issue, and I know many of you have asked about this, is what about ballot harvesting? We have third parties in California, it's now legal to do this, go around and collect ballots and deliver them to polling places. And there's no check on any of that. No one watches who's doing it. No one makes sure that they aren't suppressing ballots or creating them out of whole cloth. Virtually no way of checking what's going on there. In North Carolina, you may have heard about an election that may have been stolen by a Republican operative who did ballot harvesting, which is illegal in North Carolina. That's why it's illegal, because of the issues I raised. But it's legal in California, which raises the prospect of fraud. So we're not done in California. It's not just about cleaning up the rolls, it's ensuring election integrity through voter ID, figuring out what's going on with this ballot harvesting mess in California and other places. So your Judicial Watch is on it. You know, the federal government, despite our complaints about its size and complexity, you know, it's not too often involved in policies that affect your personal safety directly. Immigration is one of those exceptions, because the failure to secure the border, the failure to deport illegal aliens as the law requires, the failure to enforce immigration laws, puts your lives at risk, puts your family lives at risk, because it allows individuals who are not supposed to be here, puts them in situations where they can break the law and harm you. Now, what should the president do? You know, the politics, I defer to the experts on the politics. Well, I really don't, but I guess I'll tell you what I think. I think he should insist on a wall, but I don't think we can wait for a wall. And I know there's been talk of the president declaring a national emergency, and some people are concerned about the president invoking a law that's been invoked repeatedly by other presidents to actually confront a national emergency, which is the national security and public safety threat caused by the open border. And we're all supposed to be nervous about that. Forgive me for not being terribly nervous about that. But another thing he can do, and it may be along the lines of a national emergency, and I would encourage him to do this no matter whether or not he wins on the wall, which is to deploy our military to secure the border. It's a 3-word order. He can issue it to his generals at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or however the regulation requires. General, secure the border, and the border will be secured. It might require initially the deployment of tens of thousands of troops, but our military is great and it can secure borders quite efficiently and effectively. And we should build a wall to take the pressure off the military in terms of its having to deploy resources there to secure the border. But in the meantime, we should have the military securing our border. And it doesn't mean that commercial traffic will end. It doesn't mean that cross-border interactions between Mexico and the United States will end. No, it will mean that people who are supposed to come here legally will be able to. Those who won't be able to. I've long believed that the military should be used to secure our border. I know the president is pulling troops out of Syria. He's thinking of pulling troops out of Afghanistan. I'm not saying put those poor guys and gals who have been deployed there for too long down in Mexico. But obviously, if we're going to deploy troops to defend our interests abroad, we can deploy troops to defend our interests here at home. And I think that's something the president should do.